Welcome back to Adventure Pete. It's glad to see you here. So, if this is your first time here, make sure you like the video, comment, tell us what you think, tell us what you want to hear about, and subscribe. We got a lot of great content coming, a lot of great content already in the channel, so be sure to check it out. So what we're doing today is working on this 1989 4 Winds 205 Sundowner with the OMC Cobra outdrive. So we're having shifting issues with the boat. We have already replaced the upper shift cable and the throttle cable and rebuilt the entire shift box up front because we're having issues where it was sticking and not coming out of gear. So now what we're having the issue is when you go to engage it, it's kicking out of gear. So the only thing left to worry about is our lower shift cable. And since it kind of varies, it's not every time it does it. And once you go further in the throttle, it seems to engage more. So I'm concerned that we have an issue at the bottom end. So something's either not right, something's broke, things like that. So we need to check it out. So we're going to actually pull this lower unit off and check and see what kind of issues we're having down here. If not, we're going to verify it's in spec to make sure we're good to go to keep pursuing this problem. So stay tuned. We'll keep working on it. So to start with, we need to get this lower unit off. So the way I like to do it is we start this low down and keep the skeg just off the ground. We'll end up putting a block of wood down here so it actually rests down there. When we drive it off, that gives it something to balance on. Up here you've got 3 bolts on this side, 3 bolts on the other side. So you take your wrench, take those off, and then what I like to do is, since that gasket's sealed on there nice and tight, and you got the O-rings through the drive itself with the gimbal bearing, keeping it kind of stuck in place, I'll actually use the trim cylinders and press upwards on the trim, and that'll actually push that straight out, and sometimes wiggling on the tail will allow that seal to pop and get the outdrive off. Once I know it's popped and still on the nuts itself, then I will take the nut off the one side and just drive the one shaft out, and then hang the rams off a bungee cord or a ratchet strap so they're not just dangling by the hoses, and go from there. So it's not a hard job, it's just kind of time consuming. Well, that's how to do it the easy way. So now we're down here, we're looking to inspect and check things out, see what everything is doing. So this little rod right here gets driven by the shift cable. So the shift cable sends this rod up and down. That's what adjusts the fork that's inside the outdrive up and down. So I want to make sure this is not actually failing and it's nice and tight, because that bolt right there keys into that shaft. So we're making sure that's all good. On the top here of this shaft, that rivet can go bad on there, so we got to make sure that's good, and that's looking good. What I'm seeing here is that right there, that's way too much play for a shift cable to have, because it's in neutral, it's locked in neutral, and up top that doesn't move up there at all. So that's too much. We've got just over 1/4 inch of play in and out on that short cable. I mean, that's like a 4-foot cable. They have that much play. That is absolutely too much. So that's why we're getting issues with it kicking out of gear and not shifting properly. This plastic thing can also wear out and go bad, but there's not much play in there at all. So this does have a bad lower shift cable. So what we're going to do is, this part of the series is we're actually going to talk about how to replace it, and we're going to make this into a 2-parter. So the first part is we're just going to show replacement of this cable, because it tends to be a pain in the butt and it's going to be lengthy, and then we'll make a part 2 on how to properly adjust it with these OMC engines, because they're very specific. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. So first thing we need to do is get this assembly all out of the way. So we're going to start with this bolt. We're going to take that bolt out. It simply just runs into a slot and key. So this shaft will actually pull out first, and then this arm will be able to come out afterwards, because that's how that works. That's just a set screw to that shaft. So we're going to loosen that up, pull that shaft out. That allows us to take this arm out. Once we get that arm out, we can get this plastic sleeve out of here, which is done by this bolt right here. We take it all the way out, because what that does, this steel retainer there, that actually holds it on here. So this threads into that. Then this, once that's out of there, you can actually spin it off counterclockwise and take it out, and this plastic sleeve will pull right off the shaft. And that's how we get that all end assembly out of the way. And from there, we're going to be working on the back side to get that out. So this right here is what I'm referring to. We take this bolt and thread it out the rest of the way. And this will spin off. Just like that. Set that out to the side, and then this will pull straight off just like that. Sometimes this can actually get beat up, and you can see it's actually kind of worn in right there a little bit. It's got some chunks missing out of it, so it's been abused a little bit. Sometimes these tabs, especially this smaller one right there, can get cracked off, but this one's in good shape. But yeah, that's how to take it apart right there. Pretty simple. Now that we got the shift cable there, what we're going to do is take a ratchet strap, hold this up at an angle so we can get to the actual nut on the back side of it to be able to get the back end off the cable out. So now that we have the housing held up by a ratchet strap to make life easier to get to the back side, that is our cable end right there, and you can see it comes into the back side right here. So from there you can see that little brass thing. That is the back side of the cable. That is screwed in with an O-ring seal. There's two ways to get this out. You can either use a crowfoot socket with an offset to get up in this gap. You simply just go up in there, and that allows you to give access to it to be able to take it out, or this way, whichever way you want to do it. That gives you access to get in there. Or, because we have to cut this cable and get it out of here anyways, this is usually pretty corroded in there. Most take cutters, just cut the cable sleeve right there. Just cut it off straight, then use a normal short well socket on that and unthread it out. Just 3/4 inch. So, because the reason why we cut that most of the time is because we can use this now. We feed the new cable in as our leader and pull the new set through. Because it does go through that hole in the backside way down in there. And you can only have so big of an end to fit through that, so this brass casing end doesn't always come and feed through there. So most people will just cut it, take it out with a socket, do it the easy way, because it's got to get cut and pulled through anyways. So you can do it either way if you want. Or some will do it the hard way, take it out and just pull it back through with a string, and then use a string to pull back through, and then they can reuse this cable for something else. But this cable is bad. I really don't want to keep it around the house and accidentally reuse it again, so we're probably just going to cut it to be the easy way, and it's going to get cut anyways, and we'll take it out with a socket. So you see the hole right there, that's where it was. You can see the cutoff cable right here. We just got it sitting off to the side. That'll go back through there. And here's the end piece right there. We got it cut off. You can see the O-ring on there, some threads. And that's where the problem was. It was cracked big time right there. So, yeah, something happened where this got cracked or bent and pulled, causing some issues, and it wore out. Other than that, we'll disconnect from the top, and we'll get it prepped and ready to pull the new one through. So this right here is the other end of the lower shift cable. So you got this cotter pin right here that needs to come out. That will allow the trunnion to come out of that pocket. And then up here we got another little cotter pin that needs to come out to allow this to come off the lower shift bracket. Once we do that, this little boot right here sometimes has a zip tie in the very base of it to allow it to stay on there. Sometimes you have to cut that zip tie, otherwise you got your outer boot and this little inner grommet that you can kind of see in there. Has a little inner grommet. So if you start pulling this cable as a full assembly, pulling it back out, that might pop off with it. So that can come off and you slide on the new one. So here we have our new cable. This is actually a Sierra cable, and this will go in place of that. So I'll show you how we're going to prep it the easy way to make it easy so it goes back in. What I like to do is on this end, take this threaded rod, because it's just threaded in there on that base right there, and we're going to unthread it out, because if we try to pull with this trunnion through that cable, it will go. It's just going to fight us a little bit. So to have less in there makes it a lot easier. So we're going to take this out. So if we just unthread it like that, it will pull out the cable. And we're going to set that aside. Then this cable itself, we're just going to push back into the casing. so that way it's not sticking out and gets bent. So when it's pushed back in like that, we're actually going to take some tape and tape this to the old cable. Doing so with electrical tape and things like that, that will allow us to feed it and guide it back up into the engine compartment and pull right through easy without having to fight too much with it or just trying to blindly push it up and hope it gets through. So as you can see, they're just laid together and taped up pretty nice and tight. And I've got my cable stretched out and ready to go. So I did grease the new cable because it does go inside that tube and it does go back and forth and wiggle just slightly as the outdrive goes up and down. It's not required to do it. I just like to do it as an extra little precaution to make things move easy. And when I'm feeding in a new cable, a little bit of grease helps out. So I'm going to go up top and start pulling it through. Now this can be done as one person. Sometimes two helps. Have one person help try to feed it from the bottom while the other person at the top tries to pull it through, but that's all it takes. Pulling it right through. And there we got the tape done right there. So now we can untape it, take this old cable off and throw it away, and start getting the new one ready to go. And now that we've got this part of the cable sticking back out again, we're going to take our piece that we pulled out before and just guide it back in here and thread it back in. We're just going until it seats. Everything's nice and loose. We're not going to force it any further. And we're going to stop from there because everything else we need to do is done from the bottom side before we can do any more up here. Now the next step of the process is to get this cable up and through that hole that's up in there. That's right there. And then tighten it down. So this brass sleeve is crimped onto the actual cable itself. So when you're threading in there, it doesn't free spin. You got to take your time to make sure that cable doesn't get bound up on the other side, and just take your time and work it slow so you don't break the brass sleeve or the crimps or ruin the cable casing and things like that. So up top, that's why we left it free and open, and sometimes with the grease it helps it spin around freely. And so we're going to work it slowly and try to get it up in there and tighten it down. So that seal is all it takes to seal on these. I'm going to add some grease on there just because grease always helps fill in the gaps, especially with things that get corroded like these over time. So I'm going to pack it with grease to fill the gaps and help it out maybe, and then tighten it down. This is where having one of those crow feet definitely helps for tightening it down, but it can be done with a wrench. Just got to take your time and work through it and get it back in there. One trick I like to use, because sometimes doing it by yourself is a little tricky, because that cable, when you're tightening it, that cable being up in the S-curve that goes through it, it doesn't want to keep moving with it. So sometimes it'll want to rebound back. So keeping this straight, which you can use this to hold with your finger to hold it straight, but using that, it sometimes keeps rebounding back. So if you actually take a rubber hose, this is 3/8 inch, just regular hose, put it on there, you can actually use your pliers now to grab onto that end without marring up that brass surface to help hold it in place, so you can actually start using two hands to tighten it down. So you're not tightening it with this, you're just kind of holding it in place. So when you actually do it with a crow foot, it doesn't keep rebounding back, and then you have to keep fighting it more and more. Otherwise, somebody on the inside usually just use their hands and just keeps rolling the casing with you, and hopefully it gets easier. But a little tricky to do this part, but can still be done, especially by one person. Or if you really want to, you can take this whole case off and try to do it the other way, but I'm not pulling bellows off and all the other fun stuff like that, so I'm just doing it this way. It's easy to do, and it can be done. So little tricks to help out. So now I got the shift cable in, everything's mounted in there. I like to move this up and down a bunch of times and make sure the cable is free moving, you know, not binding up, things like that. And make sure this cable moves in and out properly too. So if everything's working good there, that means nothing's bound up, and then that's good to go. Next, we're going to install the grommet. So with the outdrive pressing the upward position just like this is where that boot will be in the compressed position when the boat is in the water. And when that comes down, that pushes that cable in, so that boot will actually stretch out and extend. So we're going to start with the compressed position. That way when it extends out as it needs to, and doesn't slide or pull off the tube inside. So that's why we're back in this position right now. So this is what the boot and grommet look like up close. And this is what goes over top of the cable, and this goes on the inner tube that the cable rides in. Then you have that end comes out, and then you have your split grommet right here. That goes around the casing and then fits right in there, tightens up, actually presses in there. That's what keeps it attached to the cable. And then you have the zip tie that goes around the actual base assembly right here. That keeps it tied onto the tube that the cable runs through. So just so you can see what it looks like. And there you have it. Got the zip tie on there, we got the boot, and then the inner sleeve. That's all right there. Now that's time to start reassembling. This is the old one, obviously, where it's got some marks and some markings and some chunks missing out of it like that. So that's not stellar. So it did work, and there were no problems with it, but marring and things like that makes you question how much this has been used and abused. So the new replacement that exists out there is a fully aluminum one. So this should be a lot nicer than this. Should take up a little bit more wear and abuse. And if there's any structural cracks and fractures that I can't see on this one, I don't have to worry about it failing as much. And plastic, those fingers will give and slop. This will not, so this should also tighten up my shift pattern as well and help everything out. So we're going to start assembling with the new aluminum one. We're going to still use the same block and same threaded bolt and put it all back together. Now when you do put this back together, this shaft does need to be greased. That's what they call out for in the book. So we're going to grease this shaft before we put it back together as well. Now that that's in there and tightened down just like it was, next thing to do is install this pin roller and stuff. So we're going to put the arm in first, then slide the pin in there, and then tighten everything down back the way it was. So we got to make sure that bolt goes back in that little dimple that's on the shaft there to make sure it's lined up in place. And you can see it right there, so that's the dimple that bolt goes with. So we'll put that back together as well. Make sure to grease up that shaft so it's all in good working order. So as you can see, that's all put back together in there. This is now nice and tight. There is no slop in this at all. It doesn't move at all. It's nice and smooth. It still cycles nice and smooth like it should. You always want to make sure it does that without any rattling. This can move a little bit, and that's okay. But everything's put back together. I like to use a lot of grease just because you're there, you might as well. It always helps things last a little bit longer, especially when you got to do water and corrosion. So now that everything is reassembled, the last step is to set cable lengths with these. So these are specific to years, so we'll get started. As a note for setting cable length on these OMC Cobra drives, there's a few different generations of them, and they all are similar, but just a hair different, and sometimes the dimensions themselves. They all look the same at face value, but sometimes the cable set dimensions that we're going to do on the inside can be a little different. So this is specifically for a 1989. Most of the legwork and the process is all the same, but just when it comes to that final dimension up top, that's where specifically you need to know. So sometimes having a manual really helps. So I like the C-Lock. It's actually very good. You see all the tabs and places I have marked on there for application specific things that I need to know how to do. So having one of these helps. So we'll get on to it. So now we have our specialty tool for keeping this lower shift lever in place when we do our final adjustments up top. It is key to have this piece itself. You can get these on the internet pretty cheap. So this one is going to be the same across all the generations. Up top there is another tool that you can get to use with that. They all look very similar. The problem is they all are the same and all the dimensions are different, because actually I had mine marked so I know the exact numbers, because if you go by that, that gapping is actually wrong for what my engine actually calls for. So I actually labeled mine for my correct engine. So this tool isn't as necessary as that one, but usually when you find them on the internet they come together, so that is something to note. We're going to use these, but I'm going to show you the dimensions up top. So now that we got everything done downstairs, on everything down there is locked in. This cable, this should not be spinning at all. That should be nice and free flowing, so that's nice and locked in. The trunnion you can have free flowing right now as well, as long as it's lock nut. For my dimensions, I need to have that backed off. So next thing we got to do is we take our sleeve, and this is going to get installed on the end of the cable. And we just want to have it loosely on there right now because we want to be able to adjust this depending on what our dimension needs to be. And it's imperative to make sure this is perpendicular. So when we tighten it down, it's not like this, because we don't want to put pressure on this cable trying to bind it and twist it back into place for that to go on that stud. So we want this to be free floating in this position as best we can. So when we put it on, we're not binding up that cable for the long term. So we're going to get that set. On mine, being a 1989, they call for 7 9/16 inch from the cable sleeve end, which is got marked right there, to the center of that post. So that's what it calls for a 1989. So 86 to 88 is a different dimension, along with 90 to 93. I believe is actually the same 7 9/16. So just got to be aware of that. So that is part of the book to know what the dimensions. I labeled mine as 89 OMC. So that way I know where everything needs to be. And then also this trunnion being adjustable, we set that to 6.5 inches on center. I had to mark that on this tool because it did not come pre-marked for that, because it actually says 6 inches for whatever reason. So that's why I say when you look at these online, make sure you know what you're looking for. They may be generic, and that's fine. I just marked it for what I need it to be, so it matches my dimensions. You don't need this tool specifically. If you can take a tape measure, mark it from that edge to the center where that trunnion is and be able to eyeball it and do it that way, more power to you. There's nothing wrong with that. And then going from center of trunnion to center of that sleeve where the pin goes, that's all you need to do with that. So we're going to adjust it, get everything lined up, and then get it put back in the hole. So when you put it back in, down here, that's where the trunnion goes. You want to make sure you put grease on that because that does pivot and move. So you want to grease that up, and a little bit of grease on that little sleeve goes a long ways as well. And then you put the cotter pins back in, and you're good to go. So as a note, you can see I have my tool lined up with my marks at the back end. But over here, this sleeve, I cannot get this pin on that for adjustment. It does not go on any further. That's okay. These are meant to be that this cable right here, you can actually trim that to length. You can cut that down right here, so this will actually go on the rest of the way, because these are semi-universal cables. So that can be adjusted. If you don't want to trim it here on the bottom side where we tighten that nut on there, if you thread that on farther and pull more cable out, then you can put this on there instead without trimming it down. So that right there is all there is to it. So now that is reinstalled. Obviously we got to put cotter pins back in it still. So hopefully that was helpful for installing a new lower shift cable on an OMC Cobra engine. So next thing we would have to do is install the outdrive and then just test it. So we're not going to do that just yet with this part of the series, because we're actually going to do a part 2 and talk about actually adjusting this assembly further on before I actually install the outdrive and water test it. So if you don't have to do any of that and all you had to do is a shift cable, you're good to go. Put the outdrive back on and give it a test. Other than that, we'll see you here for part 2. So make sure to like the video, comment, tell us what you think, tell us what you want to hear about, and subscribe. We got a lot of great content coming, a lot of great content already on the channel, so be sure to check it out, and remember to have a great adventure.